It's only a kick, a jump, a block. It's only a serve. It's only a tackle, a run. It's only for the fans. After all, it's only pressure. You got this. Adidas.
With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at Marines.com.
Welcome to the College Football Playoff Show, where college football playoff contenders earn the right to be discussed and where the playoff never ends. Now, here are your hosts, Doug Lesmerises and Shehan Jeyarajah. Thanks to you guys for joining us on the show again, the big Wednesday show that we do right after the rankings are released on Tuesday night. We want this as hot and fresh as possible, which means we're doing it later Tuesday night because, of course, why wouldn't college football delay its most important thing at this part of the season to wedge it in between the opening of college basketball season? They were going to have a panda on a trampoline between the two college basketball games, and then they said, well, no, let's not have a panda on a trampoline. Let's unveil football rankings, because why wouldn't football be a sideshow? Why wouldn't how you determine your football champion be a sideshow to a meaningless first game of a long college basketball season? This is where Cincinnati's passing. Resume test, yes. Eye test, yes. CYA test, yes. They have 3 passing grades. They have potentially failing grade in the score test at the moment and in the emotions test. Because again, you can't have your opponent look lousy and then play a close game, and then you end up not getting credit for your great plays that you made at the end to hold off a team. And make no doubt about it, Cincinnati made great plays at the end to hold off Tulsa, who looked incompetent when the committee flipped that game on for the first 5 minutes. All the time, it's like, why would you do a thing that makes your fans hate you? When they do something like 2 weeks after Michigan State beats Michigan head-to-head on the field, they put Michigan ahead because now they both have one loss. Does it make college football fans hate this sport? Is that what's happening right now, Shehan?
It's not just that. It's the combination of Michigan State beating Michigan 2 weeks ago, like you mentioned, but then making sure that it's very important to them that Ohio State stays behind Oregon because they played each other, right? They played and it was really close. So, you got to keep them behind each other. And of course, when you look at Michigan versus Michigan State, you got to look at the numbers. You got to look at the metrics, because Michigan, if you really look at it on both sides of the ball, a more complete team than Michigan State. Of course, there's no real way for us to know since it's not like they played or anything. We've looked at these numbers with Oregon, and the numbers between Oregon and Ohio State are not comparable. They're not, right? Oregon's like in the 20s and 30s in a lot of different metrics. Like, it's not close. Because they beat Ohio State, so we know that they have the potential to beat Ohio State. We keep them up there, right? And so, and I will say, Nicole Auerbach over at The Athletic, she had a question. The last question of the teleconference was, are you okay with basically there being this disparity between, some things decided by head-to-head and some not? And personally, I don't have a huge issue with that, right? Like, I think that situations are different. I do think it's a good thing that context can be taken into account. But when you have two situations that are that comparable, it really makes you look bad. And, the other thing too, right? And I try to take everybody at face value. I try to believe that people are acting legitimately and rationally. But when they pulled up for the first time ever, I've watched these rankings since 2014. For the first time ever, they pulled it up and they go 10, 9, 8, and then put 7 on there. It's like, oh, you're just trying to give us something to talk about, because this doesn't actually matter, because we're sandwiching this in between, like you mentioned, 2 college basketball broadcasts. So actually, this is the most important thing that's ever happened. We got to have all these images of Grapevine, Texas, Gaylord, hotel ballrooms and all that. But actually, it doesn't matter at all, because we're going to make this up in order to give you something to talk about.
So when I did the mock committee a couple of years ago, it was at the Gaylord Palms in Grapevine, Texas. The Gaylord Palms,
Gaylord Texan, I think it's called.
Oh, the Gaylord Texan. The Gaylord Palms is the one in Florida. There's like five or six.
It's right down
Gaylord.
The road from me. So
That's where you live?
Yeah, I live close to there. I live close.
I'm going to come see you. I'm going to come see you next time.
Come on out.
I want to take my family there. Have you been to the Gaylord Texan? Have you been to it?
It's
like
a really nice
city. It's a city in a hotel.
It's crazy. You got to come at Christmas time. I don't know if you've ever been, but they have crazy setup. They
have one in Nashville. The same kind of thing. Big skate park. You skate, you have Christmas songs. They have like people sing and stuff. Oh, it's lovely. It's too nice of a hotel. They should. They don't need to be in that nice.
Put it at a Sheraton or something.
Yeah, they should be at a Fairfield Inn eating a continental breakfast.
Right.
But here's what happens. I mean, this is the thing, and I think one of the things we want to do, one of the many, we want to educate people slightly, at least. I think people know this by now, that whatever the committee chair is, the real answer to why did you do something is Eric and Stan went and got a cookie during the break, and we thought we were all leaning one way, and then Eric and Stan came back and were like, we just think Michigan's better. And that is it. And Gary Barta can't say, I don't know what Eric and Stan said to each other when they got a cookie, but it changed the whole room. Because I like the idea of acting like the committee is a thing. Like, oh, we got to go in the back and like feed the committee. Oh, don't let the committee out. The committee is going to like go out in the field and attack a bird, right? The committee is not a thing. The committee is many things. And any group of people, they're nuts. A group of people is nuts. It'd be like having a party and being like, hey, what song should we put on the jukebox? You got to know what a jukebox is, right? The jukebox. And people just shout out songs. That's kind of how they do it.
Yeah, and on top of that, imagine doing that, and then like two of the people in the room are General Ray Odierno and Condoleezza Rice for some reason. Like,
yeah, no, right.
And I mean, that's the funny thing about this, right? Like, just to take a step back, I mean, these are people who know about football, and the other thing too, and we've talked about this before, is it is a good thing that there are people who are dedicated to having to sit down and watch these things all day, because I think that is something that obviously with the AP poll, it's just very difficult to do because you're covering a certain team. But at the same time, it's like, kind of got some people in there, just some guys, just some people, because why not?
So I do think the only point here, because thankfully it's going to get worked out on the field. Wait, but it already did get worked out on the field and they ignored it. So maybe it won't get worked out on the field. Here's the thing that is happening for real. And as you said this, the hard part is there are some things from a metrics standpoint that are happening. The metrics love Alabama, and whatever they say, that's why Alabama's too. It's because of metrics. The metrics love Michigan. Whatever they say, it's because of metrics, right? The metrics love Ohio State. Some metrics think Ohio State should be 2 or 3. And honestly, they want to put Ohio State ahead of Oregon, and they're afraid to because they think everybody's going to yell at them. Because look what happened when they did it to Michigan State. It's not that they want to follow the head-to-head. It's that they don't really want to follow the head-to-head, and they've reluctantly been doing it with Ohio State because they think everyone's going to yell at them. So they're waiting until Ohio State gets a signature win. It might even be against Purdue this week because Purdue's now in the top 20. But they know they don't have to do it yet.
Right.
So they're waiting. And they don't want to get yelled at. So actually, Shehan, the issue tonight is not the shock that Michigan is ahead of Michigan State. It's why don't you just get some guts and do the thing you want to do? Just do it. You want to do it. It's like in the movies, right? When you're like the guy's like, I'm going to kill you. And it's like, do it. Just do it. Just ignore Oregon's win. You know you want to do it. So they want to do it. Right? They want, and they're going to. And then that can back justify the thing they did tonight, because now tonight the Michigan thing looks nuts when it's actually just a clue. It's their secret. It's how they actually feel. They want to ignore head-to-head results.
And the other thing, too, that I feel like is a part of this is that I talked about it a little bit last week when they released the first ranking, but in a lot of ways, the 6 through 25 of the rankings is just like their playground, because it really, I mean, the top 4 is the only thing that matters, which is fair, right? Which is reasonable. And so one thing actually, funnily enough, involves my alma mater is Baylor went and lost to a terrible TCU team. They only dropped 1 spot because they're trying to also set up Oklahoma to have a path to beat Oklahoma State and Baylor and Iowa State and still make the playoff, right? Like if Baylor falls to 21, that doesn't happen. And, similar sort of deal, right? You heard this week because Fresno State went and got absolutely obliterated by Boise State. You still heard when Oregon was being talked about as a team in the top 4, you still heard them talk about Fresno State, even though Fresno State's no longer in their rankings. And, which isn't a big deal, but it's like, I think that for me, that's a frustration because it kind of shows how little regard they're actually showing for the top 25. They're paying attention to the top 4. They know what they're doing in the top 4, top 5, top 6, whatever. But it's like the rest of it is just kind of like, okay, here are the teams that we think are good. I think that Bama's really good. Well, what would say that Bama's really good? Let's do that. Let's put Mississippi State in the rankings. Let's make sure that Texas A&M is the top 10 team right now so that they look like they got beat by a really good team. And so it really is like such a reverse engineer of just confirming what they already thought in the first place.
No, that's one of the smartest things that you have opened my eyes to is them reverse engineering the bottom half of the poll to rationalize the top half of the poll. And it will be interesting if and when we ever get to the expanded playoff, when 8 through 12 are going to actually matter all of a sudden. Right. And then all of a sudden 15 matters because you're kind of positioning 15 for 12. So you can't just use the bottom half of the poll to set yourself up. One of the weird things is there are things, and this is why the metrics, I like numbers, but you've got to be careful. The reason. So by the way, I swear to God, Gary Bart has said it enough. Did you hear my question on the post game? You didn't get in. So we're playing. It's like Jeopardy, trying to buzz in to get your buzz.
Right. And I keep losing.
You got to work on your buzzer finger this week. You just start buzzing things.
Just boom, 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 boom. Yeah, I got it.
Go to your doorbell outside your house. Just be like ding, 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 ding. Get that finger quick. Boom. I was doing my finger exercises. Look at that. Look at that speed on that pointer finger. Bang, nailed it. Star 1. So I got my question in this week. I was not blackballed. I just was slow on the draw, but I got in this week. Did you not think the way Gary Barta was talking, he was practically saying, you're just lucky we didn't rank Michigan ahead of Michigan State last week, hours after the head-to-head Michigan State win? Didn't it sound like he was kind of saying that?
Yeah. No, I mean, it did. And the other thing, too, right, is that it is obvious that, and just to take a step back again, obviously Gary Barta has to stand up and justify the whims of everybody on that committee, right? Every single person on the committee has an opinion, and Gary Barta has to stand up and represent all 12 of it. So I understand he has an unenviable job that's really going to make him have to talk himself into a corner defending things he doesn't actually believe. But to already at that point be having those kinds of thoughts, right? It makes no sense. I mean, somebody jumped in my mentions after I kind of tweeted about the discrepancy between 3 and 4 and 6 and 7 or whatever it is, and was like, well, but Michigan State was at home versus that one was on the road, and obviously Michigan State, like, I'm not saying it was a fluky win by any means. They won the football game. Like, it was a late surge where they did a bunch of things and kind of came back and won the game. Like, it was a very close game. I'm not saying that that Michigan should be dropped to 15 over it. But when you compare Michigan and Michigan State, you know what Michigan State has that Michigan does not, is a win over a top 10 opponent. So what are we doing?
I will say from a subjective standpoint, I came up with the exact opposite reaction of the Michigan State game. I thought Michigan was lucky to get a couple early turnovers from Michigan State. A ball gets batted in the air, Michigan State intercepts it. I was not at all surprised when Michigan State came back. I came away from that game, and we talked about on this pod, I went into that game when I reevaluated saying, you know what, are we not sure? Do we not think that maybe Michigan State is actually the better team here? And I came out of it thinking, no, Michigan State's the better team. The better team won. So for them to be like, we think Michigan's the more complete team, it's only metrics, and here's the only reason. Because I did the math. They've only played, like, Michigan only has 8 wins, right? They each only have 8 wins. 4 of their 8 wins are against the same teams.
Right.
So that is a direct, like, common opponents matter. The same teams are Rutgers, Nebraska, Northwestern, and Indiana. Michigan against those 4 teams outscored them 114-56. Michigan State outscored them 112-69. So Michigan has a 15-point edge in 4 head-to-head games.
Cool.
Okay. So, like, okay, well, is that it? Because the only other stuff then, you have some, like, couple wins, right? You get Youngstown State and Western Kentucky, right? That's kind of like Western Michigan and NIU. You get like a Miami win. This is only the only thing, unless you're saying, well, and it's one of these things again, Michigan's loss is to a better team. It's like, yeah, the better team that you rank behind Michigan.
Right.
Because Michigan State's better than Purdue, but they're not better than the team they beat. The only thing that Michigan's resume, right, that you could say is the win over Wisconsin. And for some reason, the metrics love 5-3 Wisconsin, which in some of these metrics, game control, some FPI stuff is like a top 10 team with 3 losses. Wisconsin, for some reason, being artificially inflated by some metrics, has artificially inflated Michigan in the same metrics. And those are the metrics that are leading them to put Michigan ahead of Michigan State. It is a win over Wisconsin, and that's it. And they have decided that because Michigan beat Wisconsin and Michigan State didn't, Michigan State would then comparably beat Miami, Florida, okay? That trumps the head-to-head. That's what they've decided. I don't even know. And again, I believe it. I have too much confidence in myself. I think I could get in that room in 10 minutes and reverse their thinking on this. I really do. Like, and I know people who know me or who have listened to me on other podcasts would be like, well, of course Doug thinks that. But I really do, because I don't think there's enough. It is not a concrete argument, right? And so I think that it is wobbly. Whereas the thing about head-to-head is, if you decide that that's the thing you go on, it's concrete, right? Now, I'm not saying it always should win out, but there's no wobble to that, because it's like, well, when they played, I picked the team that won. And then you got to decide how much of an earthquake happens to shake that foundation. And these guys are like, this is a house of straw. What was that, 2.3? Oh, they lost to Purdue. That's a 2.3 on the Richter scale. The Michigan State house fell down. Made of straw. I don't think it was made of straw, man. That's 3 little pigs. That's real talk. Get me in the room. I'm going to 3 little pigs those people.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Because I would just say, and we're never going to see it because for no other reason, like the committee doesn't want to embarrass the people on the committee. But like, I'd love just to see them deliberate, because I feel like the way that this comes about, you kind of mention it, but it feels like it just has a general feel of like no one cares. Like, I don't know, sure, let's do that. Like, Alabama's probably good, right? That nice boy Nick Saban seems to have a good team again, right? So I mean, let's just put them up at number 2. Well, they're number 2. It just feels so. It's a combination of feeling like, okay, well, the teams that we probably think are probably good. And then the other side of that is like, if we don't know about a team, let's only go to the numbers and not actually look into the numbers. Because, for example, anybody who has watched Wisconsin football this year knows that in the last couple of games, they switched running backs and it's been really good for them. That happened after the Michigan game. After it. And so there's no reason that Michigan should get credit for beating this revitalized version of Wisconsin when the version of Wisconsin that they played is the one that lost 41-13 to Notre Dame the week prior. So like, it's just, it's not understanding context. It's not understanding positioning. I mean, even I'd potentially point to for Michigan State, like a team that ranks really low in the rankings right now, that probably was a little better than what they're regarded, is Miami. Right, Miami wasn't a great team when they played, but they were a much better team than I think they're going to get credit for in the advanced stats, because a lot has happened since then.
I'm so mad. We planned a show. I had a question about Oklahoma and Ohio State teed up for Gary Barta because I wanted Gary Barta to answer, how do you evaluate when a team has made a major change? How then do you evaluate that part of the season before the change? Because that applies to Caleb Williams. It applies to Matt Barnes calling Ohio State's defensive signals instead of Kerry Combs. Is it still everything matters? Every game you play is all mixed in equally? Do you really? Because it's almost one of those things, Shehan, I think you could make a case depending on what the answer to that question is. And I think they've said enough things over time where they do take it into account. They do. Like, if you've improved, I do think they will give you more leeway on early troubles. And I think the best way to show that you've improved is to change. It's not just get better at the same thing. It's to change players, change coaches, do something, right? It's almost like if you mess something up early, just fire somebody, bench somebody,
right?
Because then you can have a concrete line in the sand, and that applies to both Ohio State and Oklahoma. How good of a question is that? And instead, I have to ask, are you kidding me? Are you telling me you discussed ranking Michigan ahead of Michigan State last week while Michigan State was still storming the field in victory? There are committee members saying Michigan's the more complete team. They're on the field. They're carrying the coach off. They've done the Gatorade dump. And the committee saying, it doesn't matter. The team that lost is more complete. That I had to ask about that instead of my big thing I thought of.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that I also feel is frustrating about Michigan specifically is that you hear about them being a complete team. And I understand that, right? I mean, when you look at their sort of down-to-down, play-to-play efficiency, they're solid. But one thing that, like, they're extremely not complete at is passing the football. Like, they are a very efficient run offense when they play against teams that can't stop their run offense. And as soon as their run offense is stopped, it turns out they're a pretty mediocre football team. But because run offense is generally play to play, and it should be considered, run offense should be considered a down to down as a more consistent source of offense than passing. I mean, it should. Because of that, the numbers are always going to favor a team that can run the ball very consistently over a team that passes the ball very consistently. And so what ends up happening is that Michigan just being able to, I mean, I'll go back and think about like you could talk about Georgia now, but like the 2012 Alabama, right? 2012 Alabama can literally just run the ball 5 yards every single play and sit on the game, right? Well, Michigan's not that good, right? Michigan's like 10%, well, more than 10%, but it's a level below that offensively. So like they can do that against teams that aren't awesome, right? They can do that every single play against teams that aren't awesome. They can sit on Wisconsin every single play. They can sit on Rutgers every single play. They can sit on Washington, Indiana every single play. But like if you can't do anything when you play against a defense that's any good, then you're not complete. What does complete mean if it means that you're complete when playing against teams that are bad? It's just not the same thing as opposed to a team like Michigan State that is less good on defense than Michigan, but like has a dynamic passing and running and consistent running component. That is a complete offense with a good defense that maybe is not quite as good as Michigan's.
So I've been waiting for the transcript so I can read it.
Go for it.
It's like one of these things. So here's the thing. Okay. This is the thing. He was saying things like this. This is a direct quote from Gary Barta. He was saying things like, the Michigan State discussion really started last week. And I would just kind of summarize that the committee went back and forth, and really the consensus was that Michigan probably is a more complete team. Statistically, offensively, defensively, they're ranked higher than Michigan State in just about every category. That being said, the committee gave great credence to the Michigan State win head-to-head against Michigan. So that's what he's saying last week, right? He's saying that he says it started last week that Michigan's a more complete team, but they gave credence to the head-to-head win. And then as soon as Michigan State lost, they took away that head-to-head win. Okay, so now I'm going to find my question. Okay. Okay, it's coming here. Okay, this is my question.
Tremendous podcasting.
You reference. I just want to get it. So, you referenced the discussion that took place last week between Michigan and Michigan State. What? And this was the incredulity in my voice. Was there some discussion in the room last week, or people in the room who thought Michigan should be ranked ahead of Michigan State last week, immediately after Michigan State beat Michigan on the field? Because that's the thing that we agreed on. It sounded like he was saying, right? That's what it sounded like he was saying.
Yes.
He said, I'm not willing to go there. What I was saying is there was and continues to be discussion that Michigan, in the opinion of the committee, is a more complete team. That's the dialogue that we had last week, and it continued this week. But I don't remember every part of the discussion last week other than to say that Michigan State got the respect and the nod for the win head-to-head over Michigan. That is what he's saying, though. He's saying that the discussion, he's saying the discussion started last week. I was like, what's the discussion? Well, the discussion is Michigan better than Michigan State? So you're saying the discussion about whether Michigan is better than Michigan State started 2 days after Michigan lost to Michigan State. That's what they're saying. That's what we did. We chose this for ourselves, Shehan. We chose it to the extent that we made a whole stinking podcast about it. This is the podcast, and there's one giant thing that actually maybe we should be scared of about this discussion, not just mumbo jumbo that's going to be sorted on the field. We'll talk about that next on the show. Catch what Shehan and I were saying about the college football playoff. This is where Cincinnati's passing. Resume test, yes. Eye test, yes. CYA test, yes. They have 3 passing grades. They have potentially failing grade in the score test at the moment and in the emotions test. Because again, you can't have your opponent look lousy and then play a close game, and then you end up not getting credit for your great plays that you made at the end to hold off a team. And make no doubt about it, Cincinnati made great plays at the end to hold off Tulsa, who looked incompetent when the committee flipped that game on for the first 5 minutes. Doug and Shehan back. We get our texter answers, and we're going to have our shadow committee rankings coming out in a second. And as soon as we make this final point, we're going to kick somebody out because I'm in the mood to kick somebody. Shehan, they want to put Ohio State ahead of Oregon. They're just holding themselves back for now, but they're clearly going to. And we said that before, and they've set that up, and we know it's going to happen. They very quickly disregarded a head-to-head win with Michigan and Michigan State. We have been talking, and we did a whole Tuesday podcast. I thought it was a good show about what Cincinnati has to do and how Cincinnati can get to the playoff and the things that Cincinnati needs to happen and the help that the Bearcats need. There is one part of that equation that we did not discuss at all, and frankly, I had never considered. But knowing how they evaluate strength of schedule, knowing how they evaluate what Stan and Eric, what kind of cookie they got during the break, does this crack the door for Notre Dame to finish ahead of Cincinnati in the final playoff rankings if Cincinnati and Notre Dame both win out?
I don't see that. I won't go that far. I understand where you're coming from. And look, Notre Dame is still they're number 9, I think, right now. They're still within striking range for sure. But Notre Dame doesn't necessarily have a game that it can point to, unless Wisconsin is just this mythical team, obviously. But they don't necessarily have a game that they can point to sort of make up for it. Now, Michigan doesn't either, of course.
Okay.
But,
so you're making my point so far. You're making my point so far.
Right. But after that Wisconsin game, I mean, you're talking UNC, you're talking Virginia, like that's how quick you kind of get to. I mean, Purdue, I guess, is now a team that we have to reckon with in the college football playoff rankings. I don't see it because I do think that I feel like if the committee felt that Notre Dame was within striking distance right now, that they'd be a little closer to Cincinnati. Because when you look at what they have to end the season, they go at Virginia versus Georgia Tech, at Stanford. If this is where they stand right now, including the wins over Purdue and Wisconsin and North Carolina, I don't know that they have enough left on their schedule to necessarily be able to jump that many spots.
Okay, I don't think so either, but they have cracked the door on it. We'll do anything, right? They have cracked the door on we'll do anything. All right, we like to kick teams out here. It makes us feel better about ourselves to throw people off of our podcast. It's a way for us to say, hey, maybe you've come to this podcast because we started talking about your favorite team, and you were part of something special here on this podcast, and we were happy to have you. But now your team lost. Now get out. Get out. We don't want you anymore. Now, if you want to stay to hear about the other teams, but we don't want your team. And the choices this week, there are only two. We started off, again, we're not adding anybody because we're starting to thin the field. Our max is 12. We can get down to 5. I don't care. We're going to talk about who deserves to be talked about. So we got to 12 last week. That's who we ranked. That's who the shadow committee ranked, right? But we're going to kick out one of those already, because one of them lost last week. Wake Forest was here and maybe gone already. Wake Forest gets in, loses North Carolina, still 8-1, still only one loss, but like maybe one loss is enough. Then there's 7-2 Ole Miss. Ole Miss beat Liberty last week in like a showdown of, hey, everybody's got great quarterbacks. Malik Willis, right? I mean, but Liberty clearly is not as good as Ole Miss. Ole Miss jumped out early, and then I think Liberty scored a couple late.
Yeah,
but
it was 24-0. Yeah.
Well, yeah, one convincingly. So which of those two? Those are the only two choices I gave, because Ole Miss at this point is the only 2-loss team we have in the 12. And then Wake Forest just got in, and they lost as soon as they got in, and everybody in the ACC stinks. So I think it's between those two. Who would you kick out of those two?
To me, it's easily Ole Miss. They're a 2-loss team. The other thing about it, too, is that they don't, unless Alabama loses twice, have a path to the SEC championship game, right? Like, if this team was Texas A&M, I think they have a little bit more of an argument. I still wouldn't make that argument, but because this is a team that cannot get a tiebreaker over Alabama, that would need a lot of chaos to go wrong just to kind of get back to the top 10, I don't see it.
You know, that is a really good point. And it does maybe crack the door on, if we're going to have a 2-loss team in this discussion, it probably should be Texas A&M instead of Ole Miss. But conveniently, guess what? They played this week. Right? Is that correct? Texas A&M and Ole Miss play this week. So I didn't ask people if they wanted to put in Texas A&M. I think if Texas A&M wins next week, I think we will have a case for putting them in, right? Because they are now the waiting on Bama to lose team that Ole Miss can't be. So I think you make a great point, but I love Ole Miss. I don't want to talk about Wake Forest. Wake Forest is out. And the Texans agree with me. Sorry, Wake Forest.
Come on.
I can't. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. We put them in. And
the committee disagrees.
They gave up 700 points. They gave up 700 points. So they're out. So the Texters, 53% kick out Wake Forest, 47% kick out Ole Miss. So Wake Forest, you were in for like an eighth of a show. Sorry. Not sorry. So Wake Forest is out, but next week, be prepared. Ole Miss is on alert. Ole Miss might get kicked out next week no matter what, because it doesn't matter. It just might be a point of, are we letting Texas A&M in as part of that? So let's go to our shadow rankings compared to the real rankings. And we can do this pretty quickly because not much changed other than this controversial Michigan State thing. Michigan State fell from 3 to 7, and everybody else just moved up a spot. And then, not much else mattered. So our shadow rankings, the point is that we still are thinking a different way than the committee, which is our shadow rankings don't like Bama as much as the committee does, and our shadow rankings like Cincinnati more than the committee does. So that's still true. Everybody has Georgia number 1. You and I both have Cincinnati number 2. The Texans have Cincinnati number 5. But that did make Cincinnati our overall number 2 team. They are number 5 for the committee. Oregon is number 3 for us. Oregon is number 3 for the committee. And we are starting to come around on you. Last week, did you not have Ohio State ahead of Oregon last week? And now you flipped that. You have Oregon ahead. I think that's right.
I think that's right.
So we are in agreement. The Texters, believe it or not, have Oregon second. Because I think the Texters, as we know, still a little bit of an Ohio lean. They want to get Ohio State up there, but they respect the fact that Oregon beat them because they respect head-to-head. So for us, Oregon as a shadow committee is 3, and the real committee, they're 3. Agreement, we both have Ohio State 4. Our shadow committee has Oklahoma 5, Oklahoma State at 8, Idle Oklahoma, right? Bama is number 6 for us, where the committee has them number 2. We, as a shadow committee, people of sound, reasonable mind, again, the shadow committee is Shehan gets a vote, I get a vote, the texters get a combined ranking vote. We have Michigan State 7, Michigan 8. So we have them in the correct order. We go by the head-to-head as a shadow committee in both circumstances. The committee, of course, did not. And then a little bit of a change at the bottom. We have Oklahoma State 9, Notre Dame 10. The committee had Notre Dame 9, Oklahoma State 10. And then we get down to Wake and Ole Miss, and they don't really matter that much. So, again, we're going to be stuck on this for a while, Shehan, because I don't think you and I are going to change our minds necessarily. Because as we talked in the Tuesday show, Cincinnati obviously didn't blow Tulsa off the field, but also Alabama didn't blow LSU off the field. And let's do a little Bama discussion here quickly. Like, Bama almost lost to LSU. LSU was like throwing the ball in the end zone in the final minutes for what could have been a go-ahead touchdown. And Gary Barta's main deal with Alabama is we still think they're good. What I guess I wasn't expecting them. Here's his quote on Bama. With Alabama, despite their close loss to LSU, the committee still views them as a strong, well-balanced team. Their offense and defense statistically are still in the top 5 in several categories, and they have 5 wins against teams with better than a 500 record. You know what? He didn't say that last week because I think Florida and Tennessee and some of these other mid-tier SEC teams went from 4-4 to 5-4 this week. So now he's talking about better than 500 record. He didn't say that last week when Bama was second, because guess what, Gary? Wasn't true last week. So now you're pulling out the 500 record mumbo jumbo, because what? Who'd Tennessee beat this week? Who'd they beat? Vanderbilt twice, and now Tennessee's good? It's a joke. It's picking and choosing, and I get it. I pick and choose
Kentucky,
too.
I believe, by the way, who is a decent team. But at the same time,
based on what? Kentucky's decent based on what? Did they also beat Wisconsin?
The reason that they had to bring up teams over 500 is because their super quality win, Mississippi State, went and lost a game against Arkansas. So they had to come up with a new reason why actually that's a good thing. And so, no, I mean, but this is what we talk about, right? Where I actually think that the committee is surprisingly transparent without realizing it by saying the committee views Alabama as a well-balanced team. That doesn't mean they are. They just like the idea that they are. And so, because the committee looks at them and is like, wow, that's a football team. They're like, well, if Bama's really good, I mean, that must mean all these other teams that are losing pretty close to them must also be good. So let's do something with that.
The committee is a big, it's not a I'm sorry committee. It's a I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings committee.
And
right?
by the way, they did turn it around by trying to justify Mississippi State losing to Arkansas by ranking Arkansas. So
Arkansas.
Now Alabama's got another win on the record.
Did anybody beat a team that Alabama beat? Could we rank them? Can we rank Mercer? Where is Mercer? Can we rank them? Do they have 2 wins? I mean, really, it's insane.
Tennessee? I feel like it's Tennessee. Hold up, I got to figure this out. But
I said last week the whole point was they had not beaten anybody with a 500 record. They didn't say squat.
Mercer's in
Bama.
Atlanta? Oh my gosh. I lived in Atlanta. I think it's Macon.
Oh, okay. Macon. Okay.
Macon. Yeah, I was going to say,
I'm
pretty sure. Yeah, I lived in Atlanta and I had no awareness of Mercer University.
The Citadel is a fine military institution. We believe Alabama's 117-2 victory over the Citadel shows what an American treasure Alabama football is.
We respect the troops.
God bless America, Alabama in the top 4.
Unless they played Wake Forest, that was a bad win.
Nick Saban retired as Alabama's coach 37 years ago. We respect Nick Saban. That's why Alabama's still in the top 4. I mean, really, they didn't say a word about wins over teams with better than 500 records last week because it wasn't true. They talked about Mississippi State. 3-loss Mississippi State was 17th. 17th. It's such a charade. Oh, Gary. It's all metrics. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's all metrics. It's just that the computers, and that's the thing, like, which is fine. Like, actually, I kind of think that's fine because he did say, right, that like subjectivity matters. He said, and I agree with that because there's this BCS algorithm that's out there that there are still people who track all the BCS stuff, right? Like if the BCS still existed, this is what it would be. And it's kind of an interesting thing to do because a lot of stuff is the same, but some of the stuff that's different is when the computers go off half chipped, right? I don't know what you would say about a computer when you go off halfway. Like that the computer does something that doesn't make sense. So then you need humans to analyze it and step in. So the simulated BCS has Alabama second, just like the committee does. But one of the big reasons is because the computers, like Alabama, the old computers, the 6 computers that were part of the BCS have Alabama second, 7th, 5th, 4th, and 6th. Okay. So that is what is sort of carrying the day with the computers. But this is an example where that's why we got away from that, because I don't trust the computers there. And for instance, the computers, the Sagarin rating has Michigan 5th, Michigan State's not in the top 12. Massey, Michigan 4th, Michigan State 7th. Wolf, Michigan 5th, Michigan State 6th. Anderson and Hester, Michigan 4th, Michigan State 7th. There's one, Billingsley, Michigan 10th, Michigan State 11th. Colley, Michigan 4th, Michigan State 7th. So what they're doing here, all the computers have Michigan ahead of Michigan State. Because you know what computers don't have? Eyes. A soul. They have robot numbers. And so I understand using metrics, but you, us, Gary, Stan, Eric at the cookie table, you must use your human logic to override the numbers. And what they're doing, now we're back on Michigan State. I don't even know how it happened. What they're doing, it's like we punted the computers. Because guess what? We don't want to let computers rule us. But so they're not ruling us, but the committee is allowing them too much power because they're leaning on the computer numbers to put Alabama second, and they're leaning on the computer numbers to put Michigan ahead of Michigan State. And there's nothing in the resume test or the eye test that I think justifies any of that. And they are falling back on that. But when they present it, they don't want to say that specifically. So they say things like Mississippi State or 500 record when it applies, when in the end, it's all about the metrics. And that is we as a human race ceding powers to the robots, and we'll all pay for that in the end.
Well, and this might take us to a shorter discussion of what we were thinking about talking about. If you look at the top 5 of the simulated BCS, Georgia 1, Alabama 2, that's the same as the committee. The team at number 3 that the computers and the polls and everybody else likes more than the committee is Cincinnati. They are number 3.
Yes.
This is where it gets interesting. Number 4, you've got Oklahoma, and then number 5, you got Ohio State.
So the idea that from a computer standpoint, you are pushing down Cincinnati and Oklahoma lower than the computers say, but you're letting the computers rule the day on Bama at 2.
Yes.
Again, they are picking and choosing when to cede power to our robot overlords. But I think the way that they talk about it sometimes is disingenuous, because it is. And it's the proof again in the end that they just do what they want to do.
Yes. This may come as a huge shock. 2 of the teams that are in the BCS rankings easily are UTSA at number 15, who finally did enter at least at number 23. Thank you so much, committee, for that. That's a real privilege. And Houston at number 20, who is 8-1 at this point, and would potentially give Cincinnati the opportunity for a quality win. But we gotta put Arkansas in there.
Yeah, no, that's real. That's real. Okay, but I do think they are. In conclusion, dear God, what are they doing? And the only thing, thankfully, the only stuff that matters is Cincinnati as it relates to potentially two-loss Alabama, and then Cincinnati if they somehow would be passed by a Notre Dame team that they beat, and then it's just waiting to see whether Cincinnati gets the breaks that they need. This Big Ten stuff is just a lot of talk because somebody's going to be a Big Ten champ, and that's what's going to happen. So let's talk about a thing that is going to matter potentially, and that is this Ohio State-Oklahoma battle, and we want to get into that next after this. All right, so you guys listen to the Wednesday show. Again, what we're doing on the Wednesday show is we wait till the rankings come out on Tuesday night, then we hop on the old robot machine here, and we talk about the rankings and let that influence the discussion. The Tuesday show is for Apple Podcast subscribers only. We think it's worth it. We dig in more to the football of what just happened and not as much about the rankings because the rankings aren't out yet. And we're going to do a lot of football on this Wednesday show, too, unless the committee does something boneheaded every week, and then we can't help it. So the Tuesday show, I thought we had a really good underdog Cincinnati, what it really means, what matters, how they get there, how they should be viewed discussion that I thought was worthwhile. We're not going to do Cincinnati every week, but it's kind of like it really is at the heart of what's going on with this whole issue, this whole expansion issue. So we would invite you, if you enjoy this podcast at all, pony up the $2.99, go to Apple Podcast, you sign up there, you pay with your thumb or whatever, the chip implanted in your brain. I don't know how you do it. My kids buy me songs. If you can buy a song on iTunes, you can buy our podcast. So the Wednesday one, this one that you're listening to, is everywhere, every podcast platform, free for everybody. The Tuesday one is only for Apple Podcast listeners. If you subscribe for $2.99, we'd love to have you join us there. I want to talk about Ohio State and Oklahoma. Ohio State is 5. Ohio State's 4, Oklahoma is 8, right? That's what we're talking about here. That is not a shock because Oklahoma did not play this week. So we understand that. We understand that their view of Oklahoma has not changed yet. We have this thing that I've mentioned about how teams change. How do you think that should be applied, Shehan? If you were in that committee room, and again, honestly, you're as qualified as anybody in there. That's not to knock those people, but you sit and watch national college football all the time. How would you think about it that Oklahoma changed quarterbacks, that Ohio State changed defensive play callers, and both have seen improvement on that side of the ball, specifically related to a change? So how would you evaluate that issue and these two teams specifically?
So I will say it should matter, right? Like it is something that I think should come into play because a big part of making these rankings and making these selections is you do want, hopefully by the end of the year, the 4 best teams, right? And at least the 4 most deserving teams. And obviously that means different things to different people. It's easier for me to write off maybe some specific issues. Like, I think that Oklahoma, struggling to run the ball early in the season, it's easy for me to kind of write off some of that because when they did switch quarterbacks, it changed the way that they schemed up offense, right? I'm not going to forgive Oklahoma's passing defense for being terrible early in the year because they made a quarterback change. I just can't do it, right? And so the one that's interesting is Ohio State because I don't think it's a total coincidence that their defense looking a whole lot better also coincided with their schedule getting a whole lot easier, right? They looked bad against exactly one team defensively. They looked bad for a little while against Tulsa too, but it really was about that Oregon game and how they were able to pass the ball, and they haven't been tested in the secondary as it. Now, that's somewhat going to change. I don't want to say it's going to change that much because not many teams in the Big Ten are really throwing down the field in the first place. Michigan State is maybe one that might be able to with Peyton Thorne, but maybe it just doesn't get exposed. So it is context for me, but I also do think, one thing we talk about so much in college football is this is the most important regular season in all of sports. Now, that's always been a little bit of BS, but there is something to it. All 12 games are supposed to matter. Obviously, a 13th game whenever you play a conference championship game. And so, I think that it is fine for me to give grace, especially when considering comparable cases. But I mean, I'm not, for example, going to be willing to kind of not count Ohio State's loss to Oregon. That happened, right? And Oregon's up, high in the rankings. They're top 5 right now. They have not looked like a top 5 team at any point this season, except for when they played Ohio State. And so for me, I think that's where I have a little bit of a disconnect. Is, you almost are crediting Oregon with the win, but not really counting Ohio State too much against the loss, other than that sort of that minor head-to-head. And that's something that I guess doesn't really jive with me.
It is interesting. We're talking about them in context of each other, but I do think it sort of applies. Again, like for instance, Alabama. We've noted what really cost Alabama in the Texas A&M game was they just had a 3-and-out at a critical time that they couldn't afford, right? In part, and part of that is it's a young quarterback. Their skill guys aren't quite at the level they were a year ago. And then we saw it rear up against LSU, right? A situation where they had some 3-and-outs in critical situations. And it was sort of and listen, they've also scored the ball a lot, right? Bryce Young often has played at a high level. But to me, right, it was a little bit of the issue that cropped up against Texas A&M, cropped up again against LSU, and nothing there is going to change, right? So maybe it is interesting, too, to compare it to a team where, well, they're not changing. They didn't have an injury. They didn't replace their quarterback. They didn't replace any coaches. They don't have a guy who came in off the bench and set the world on fire. They are who they are, for good and for bad. And they were what Alabama was, honestly, right? Is that fair to say? What Alabama was in the Texas A&M loss is who they are today.
Yes.
I don't know. Now, that Texas A&M made a lot of winning plays in that game. But it wasn't a fluke, right? Like Kirk Herbstreit on the ESPN show was like, so because Kirk Herbstreit was sort of making fun of head-to-head. Like, why should we rely on head-to-head? And he said, like, just because Texas A&M beat Alabama, they're better than Alabama. And I was like, actually, I actually think that Texas A&M might be better than Alabama. I think Texas A&M's A+ game might actually be better than Alabama's A+ game. It's just Texas A&M threw in a couple stinkers while they were trying to get their backup quarterback figured out because their starter got hurt, right? I mean, that's a throwaway line. If we're talking about the Texas A&M Alabama game, who's better? Am I crazy? I'm not saying Texas A&M should be ranked higher. This is a tangent. But do you agree with that? The Texas A&M's A+ game might be better than Alabama's A+ game?
So the thing that I'll say, right, is that I think that I don't like to think about, I think that I like to think about this sort of deal in terms of like general tier quality, right? We did a tier ranking a little while ago. And so for me, I don't think that Texas A&M and Alabama are more than one tier from each other. When you look at these rankings, they're 3-4 tiers from each other. But I think that in a lot of ways, right, and I think we've even seen it with Texas A&M kind of being bumped up consistently to kind of make Alabama's loss look a little better. I think that for me, Alabama and Texas A&M are relatively comparable teams. And that's not just based on that one game. That's based on what they both did versus some of these common opponents, right? I mean, what they did against, Tennessee, what they did against whoever else, right? Like, this stuff does matter to me. And I don't know. I mean, I just feel like, not to go back to it too much, right? But with Alabama, it feels like it's, okay, well, let's just read the most generous way we can into this because we know that at their best, Alabama has been a national championship team. And so let's try to justify it that way. And so I wouldn't go as far as saying that I think Texas A&M is better than Alabama game to game, but I do think that they are much more comparable than what the committee wants to believe.
Yeah.
And so, to go back actually, again, to Oklahoma and Ohio State just for a second. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on this comparison, but like, it is interesting because I also kind of feel like they're similar tier teams, right? I mean, both these teams have done an okay job of getting past. Once they've played better opponents, they've kind of struggled. Once they played better defenses, they've kind of mucked games up. But it is interesting to me. Now, Ohio State obviously has lost because they played one of the better teams. I don't know exactly how good Oregon is, but a better team. And Oklahoma hasn't played anybody like that yet. But it is interesting to me that with that loss, with that evidence that Ohio State can't hang necessarily with these top-end teams, that there's this disconnect between a team being 8 and being number 4, when the resumes to me, and even the advanced numbers kind of back this up, they're not uncomparable teams.
It is funny. It is funny we've talked about Ohio State boosting Oregon, right? If you want to rely on that head-to-head, Ohio State boosts Oregon. I do think also Oregon is pulling Ohio State up a little bit because they talk about Oklahoma doesn't have a signature win. Who is Ohio State's signature win? Like, I don't. Is it Penn State, who's not in the top 25? Minnesota, who they fell out.
They tried to make it Minnesota.
When you look at some of the numbers, SP Plus, right, from ESPN, which again takes some outside stuff into context, Ohio State second, Oklahoma ninth. And most metrics like this, you're going to find Ohio State's ahead. SP Plus offense, Ohio State 1, Oklahoma 2. SP Plus defense, Ohio State 13, Oklahoma 55. FEI, that's a Football Outsiders efficiency metric, Ohio State 3, Oklahoma 12. Right? So that's, but in the old BCS, Oklahoma would be ahead of Ohio State.
Right.
4-5. And, you know, those are computers too. Sager and schedule strength, Ohio State so far 40th, Oklahoma State 70th. They both are going to see this schedule strength jump up. The thing that I'm wondering about, Shehan, like Ohio State's still going to have better chances for wins. Ohio State, if you assume Wisconsin's going to win the Big Ten West, the 4 teams that Ohio State's going to finish the season with in the rankings this week are 6, 7, 18, and 19. So that's their last 4 games. Like that's 4 ranked teams, right? 2 in the top 10. Oklahoma would be looking at 10, 13, an unranked Iowa State, and then either 10 or 13 again is what they would be looking at. So not so different there. And I wonder, Shehan, just like head-to-head is something that you can use as a deciding factor up until other things outweigh it. The loss that Ohio State has, other things have outweighed it to have undefeated Oklahoma below a team like Ohio State, and it's mostly lack of a signature win that Oklahoma's looked bad. But I think when you bring in a game like Ohio State's game against Nebraska, Oklahoma beat Nebraska by 1 score. Ohio State was up on 1 score on Nebraska late into the game and kicked the last late field goal to go up by 9. But Nebraska had the ball with a chance to march for a go-ahead drive in the final 7 minutes, and frankly, probably should have gotten a pass interference call on 3rd down against Ohio State that they didn't throw a flag on. Those games were basically equally close, and that's what brought me to this discussion. A week ago, I wouldn't have had this discussion, Shehan, because Ohio State did have that run for a month where they blew out terrible teams. Akron, Rutgers, Maryland, and an Indiana team that was down to its 3rd or 4th quarterback, right? But when you add in that Nebraska thing, it made me think, are these 2 teams more alike than we've been thinking? One of them has a loss and one doesn't. And if they both are going to have a full month of playing ranked teams, who's going to wind up ranked ahead? And I think that 0 in the loss column for Oklahoma, even though Ohio State has an even better strength of schedule down the stretch, Oklahoma is finally going to get some stuff they haven't had anything close to having, which is a win that impresses anybody. I wonder about it, how they'll compare when they have more data points, because they are really going to change their minds on how they view Ohio State and Oklahoma, because they're going to have a month of playing pretty good opponents.
I'm curious what next weekend looks like, right? Because I think that this conversation might actually be more useful next Tuesday, because like you mentioned, Ohio State plays Purdue. I don't think Purdue's the number 19 team in the country. I think that they're a team that sneaks up on teams and finds ways to, make life difficult for teams that maybe aren't as good as we think they are. So
they have two excellent NFL players on each side of the ball. David Bell at receiver and George Karlaftis at defensive end. And they have a former walk-on at quarterback and Aiden O'Connell, who has been playing very well.
Yes.
And then I don't know who their 19 other starters are. No offense to them.
And so I very much assume that Ohio State is going to beat the brakes off of Purdue, because I just don't think that they're actually a number 19 quality team in a normal year. Whereas I think that Baylor is like a top 15-ish type quality team. I think they actually match up very well with Oklahoma. And so, like, hypothetically, if Oklahoma beats Baylor by a touchdown, let's say, and Baylor ends up 17, 18, whatever in the next ranking, and Ohio State beats Purdue by 20 points and Purdue kind of falls out of the rankings, I'm really curious, right? Because yes, Ohio State will have a win over a team that is clearly top 40 in the committee's sort of radar, versus having like a hard fought win on the road versus a team that's kind of a legit, actually good team. I'm kind of curious, is that enough to then at that point boost Oklahoma up to ahead of the Michigan schools, for example? Because I don't think that the Michigan schools would have anything much more impressive, especially if apparently the Michigan State win over Michigan doesn't count. Like, does it boost them up to, not necessarily up to Cincinnati level? Because I think that Cincinnati's win is much better and they're a much more consistent team. But like, should it push them up to that level? I'm curious if it does.
Because the point I think we're at right now with Oklahoma is Oklahoma is undefeated and legitimately has gotten no credit for anything they've done.
No.
And Ohio State has not really beaten anybody of substance and has a loss, but has gotten some credit for some things. So the credit meter, I don't know if we know how high the Ohio State and Oklahoma credit meters go in comparison to each other. It's just that whatever Ohio State's is, they might be at like 4 out of 10 so far. And Oklahoma is legitimately at like 0 out of 10.
Yeah.
But it's possible in the end that their 10 might be a little higher than Ohio State's. I want to read what Gary Barta said about Oklahoma this week. It's similar to what he said last week. He was asked, what's holding back Oklahoma? Is it the bad strength of schedule, the bunch of close games, or the really bad game against awful Kansas, where, frankly, it looked like Oklahoma was going to lose for a while?
They should have lost.
They should have lost. And like, to that extent, it's like, it's not like Kansas is like one of the 20 worst teams probably in major college football. And like Ohio State doesn't have that. No. I mean, like, that'd be like if Ohio State was like, looked like they might lose to Akron for a while. They don't have that. But Gary Barta said it wasn't just the game against Kansas. If you look at it, they're 9-0, but they don't have any signature wins. Their best wins are against Kansas and Texas Tech. I mentioned last week, the committee noted, as anybody who's watching has noted, that Oklahoma, that the quarterback changed to Caleb Williams, has changed that team. They were off this past week, but just looking to see if that continues, because I do think that made a difference. The committee thinks that made a difference, which gets back to my point. I think they are on alert for the change. And I think they are on alert for proof that the change has made a difference. But Caleb Williams had one big game of putting numbers against Texas Tech, as we discussed last week. And as you pointed out, it was a Texas Tech team that had just fired its coach. So you weren't going to be impressed by that. I think the committee said, okay, we like Caleb Williams. You watch him. He looks good. The numbers were really only there in one game. But I think if Caleb Williams does something and it looks like he has rallied this Oklahoma team and then they beat a top 25 team, I think their credit meter, I think they might go from like a 0 to a 6 on the credit meter, like really quickly. And I think a week from now, it's possible that Oklahoma's gone from 0 to 6 and Ohio State's gone from like 4 to 5, and that Oklahoma and Ohio State could look a lot closer in the rankings next week. And so I'm really curious about that. And this is one of the things I do respect the committee for. Like, not giving into Oklahoma just because they're famous and undefeated. But I think they are on the edge of going too far. Right? That, honestly. Yeah. It's like, well, they are a Power 5 team. There's only 4 undefeated teams in the country, and they're 8th. And Alabama, who also has not beaten anybody, is 2nd. So
they beat Arkansas.
I'm sorry.
Did they? I don't even know if they played us yet.
I don't know. But no, they didn't beat Arkansas, but they lost to a team that beat a team that beat a team that beat Arkansas.
Wow. So, I'm impressed.
Wow.
No, one thing I do want to, maybe take us out of here on is a thing that's funny is that one thing you hear about the committee every week and every month and every year is that they sit down and they start from scratch. And I believe them for the most part, that they don't just bump teams up. They don't just sort of do it like that. Right. Which, I mean, that's how most people do it. It's kind of a natural human way to do it. But the funny thing about it is that Ohio State technically lost a ranked win this week when Minnesota fell out of the rankings.
True.
Alabama lost a ranked win when Mississippi State, fell out of the rankings. It didn't actually matter It didn't change anything. They didn't jump in and say, well, Ohio State fell from, 5 to 6 or somebody jumped them because they don't have a ranked win anymore, right? So it's almost like it just doesn't matter, right? Like, so yes, I mean, I do legitimately believe that they sit down and try to start over from this. But it's really about the perception. Like I've been saying this whole podcast, right? It's the perception that, well, Ohio State's good. There's Minnesota. We'll put them in so that Ohio State looks like a better team. Oh, Alabama's good. We'll put Mississippi State in. Oh, Mississippi State lost an embarrassing game. Oh, well, whatever. Alabama's still good. It doesn't matter, right? So, like, the games don't matter. Football doesn't matter. I don't understand if these things are changing, if concrete things that we talk about, ranked wins, teams above 500, which apparently matters now, wins, performance on the field, game control. If these things don't matter, why are we playing football? Why don't we just vote Alabama national champion at the beginning of the year and call it a day?
It's really good. I think you just canceled college football. Great. All right. Podcast is dead.
Time to watch some UTEP. That's all that really matters.
I do think, and in conclusion, like, one of the things Gary Barta said about Ohio State is we continue to be impressed with them offensively. They had the ball like 13 real drives last week against Nebraska. They scored 2 touchdowns on those 13 drives. They scored 26 against Nebraska. And the answer is, Nebraska's a tough team at home. They're 3-7. And they fired half their coaching staff after the game.
To be fair, Gary Barta might have actually watched Nebraska play because they're in the Big Ten West. We don't know that about the rest. I mean, for all he knows, I mean, he doesn't know whether Autzen Stadium stuff. He doesn't know whether the horseshoe stuff. Like, he doesn't know this stuff. He does know that at one point, Nebraska was a tough place to play. And I'm sure he saw a headline about how there's still a sellout streak in Nebraska as long as you include tickets that were given away for free.
The Boys and Girls Clubs of Nebraska ensured that our sellout streak continued because a bunch of businessmen who played football at Nebraska in the 60s bought them tickets that they didn't want. Also, Gary Barta is like, hey, I'm the AD of Iowa. Iowa is 20th. Iowa is 20th in the poll. And Gary Barta is thinking to himself, hey, we're 20th. We're Iowa. Nebraska's 3-7, and Nebraska is definitely going to beat us. So I respect that will be part of Iowa's 1-5 finish to the season, is losing to bailed out Scott Frost on the Friday.
Don't fire me. It's a good team, I promise. It's the greatest 3-7 team that you have ever seen in your entire life.
They have lost to, and that's the thing about Michigan State and Michigan. It's like they probably both should have lost to Nebraska.
Correct.
Oklahoma and Ohio State kind of played close with Nebraska. I mean, honestly, Nebraska should have beaten Michigan and Michigan State, who are 6th and 7th in the polls. Michigan impressed us by almost losing to Nebraska less than the Michigan State almost lost to Nebraska. So that's why we ignored the head-to-head. All right, we're riled up. We tried to have a topic to talk about. We got derailed by matters at hand, including strange things happening on the committee. We'll continue to do that every Wednesday. We'll always be talking about the rankings. We'll always try to have something else to talk about. We did use our texters to help kick out Wake Forest because they sided with me. We did use our texters for the shadow committee. Again, the texters had Georgia 1, Oregon 2, Ohio State 3, Alabama 4, Cincinnati 5, Oklahoma 6, Michigan State 7, and Michigan 8. I asked this prediction about Ohio State and Oklahoma because we had that head-to-head discussion, Shehan, and I originally thought we'd even do more. Will Ohio State and or Oklahoma make the playoff? I asked the texters that. 55% said Ohio State. 38% said both, which I think there's like probably the pathway is right there for both if they both win out. 6% said just Oklahoma, and only 1% said both will miss. So again, there's a little bit of an Ohio State lean, but only 38% said both will make it at this point, which means something's going to happen because if they both went out, they're both in. Something would have to happen to them. So people aren't confident that they will both get through. And then in asking about change, I wanted to see what the texter said. What is the best way for the committee to evaluate teams like Ohio State and Oklahoma that have made big changes during the year? The winning vote with 57% was if a major change led to major improvements, then earlier problems should matter far less. So they went the strongest they could with let the big change matter. 36% said More recent games matter a little more. So if change has led to improvement, that matters. And only 7% said the whole season matters. So I don't really care about what changed. So the texters are into change. It sounds like the committee is into change. And if that's the case, then I think in the end, frankly, that's good news for both Oklahoma and Ohio State, because I think they've changed more than any other team in the race this year. Other than Georgia, I guess, deciding Stetson Bennett's the quarterback now? I don't know, man. That's a whole nother podcast.
There will be no tape whatsoever on JT Daniels when he plays in the college football playoff, and it's going to be wild.
They're setting him up. They're going to make him Tua. They're going to bring him in the fourth quarter or the second half of the championship game.
No, overtime. That's what it's going to be. They're just going to bring him. Yeah. No, and one thing I do want to say is, for all the jokes, I legitimately believe that on this podcast, you are getting more in-depth football information than what they're getting in the committee room. I think they're watching. I believe that they're looking at it. I think they have it all on. I don't think that they are digging into the minutia to the level that we are doing on this podcast. So I truly believe that if you're listening to this podcast, you understand what's going on and what should be going on in this room as well, if not better, than the people who are actually in that room.
I still got my folder from the mock committee up in my room, so I'll bring it down for the podcast next time and we can flip through all the data. Because I do know they have all the data sheets better than data available on the internet, and they put the data up on a big screen and everybody looks at the data together. So there can be a data wave that overtakes the room, and somebody has to stop it. For real. And if nobody stops it, and I'll tell you, and I'm going to keep telling some stories about this. When I was there, you just have any group of people. Some people are louder and some people sit back a little bit more. It doesn't mean you're persuading them. But when I was there, Yogi Roth from the Pac-12, really smart, very persuasive. Joel Klatt, really smart, hates the committee as a result of the experience he had, doesn't trust any of it. And I talked a lot too. Not because I'm smart, just because I'm loud. And the three of us, I mean, I don't know that I would say our opinions mattered more, but they certainly were expressed more. So I'm sure that's how the committee works too. It's not equal. The Supreme Court's not equal, right? Some Supreme Court justices talk more than others. And then you've got to make a decision. If the right or wrong people get on a side of something, they can have a lot of power in that room. And I think there's a side for Bama too. I think there's a side for Michigan ahead of Michigan State. And we'll have to see what other sides emerge through the rest of these rankings. Next week, they'll be out at 7. And we'll be on right after 7 and then dropping this as fast as we can. Thanks to you guys for listening. Try the Tuesday pod if you like the Wednesday show. Try the text at 817-442-6789 so you can be part of the Shadow Committee. It's $1 a month. Man, that's cheap. Make sure you're reading Shehan Jeyarajah at CBS Sports. For now, for Shehan, I'm Doug. Thanks to you guys for listening. And that was the College Football Playoff Show.